Raised in Asia and Europe. As a former naval aviator, he participated in Operation Desert Storm, flying his F-14 over Iraq on 42 recon sorties. Following his naval service time, he was a DoD consultant and director of the Middle East Business Development for International Oil Trading Company. Currently, he's a managing partner with Noka World Energy, a private hedge fund. He authored Falcon on the Tower in 2007, and when not abroad, he calls Florida and Virginia home. It's my pleasure to introduce Ron Clark Ball.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for coming. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank, the Admiral. I want to thank Dave. This is an incredible thrill. I never thought I'd actually end up at the War College, so, here I am. First of all, if I could get just a show of hands of who's read the book. You guys can leave. So let me get... Falcon on the Tower. I guess we should start about how the book actually evolved into coming to being. As the Admiral said, I was born, in fact, in the tribal areas, close by actually. I was born in Rawalpindi. My dad was a CIA guy, which is why that we were, stationed there. So there was some sort of an affinity that I had with basically Afghanistan and Pakistan, the entire area. But the question that I normally get is, well, what prompted you to write a book that's 470 pages, 150,000 words, and wait until that you're about 45 years old in order to do so? It kind of comes down to a matter of time, having the ability to be able to have the time to sit down and write the novel. And then the other thing is some sort of catalyst that actually leads to getting one to want to sit down and put the things to words. So with me, the catalyst was, and just a real quick education on how this works right here. This is an Afghan photograph. You probably recognize the one that's on the left, which was the Afghan girl, and this was a cover. The one on the left, that is, was the girl as a cover. I think she was 13 years old at the time. And it was a 1985, I believe, National Geographic cover. And at the time, there were approximately 1.5 million refugees that were being forced to the Pakistan-Afghan border. And this girl was one of the ones that was, in fact, photographed by a National Geographic photographer. And it's one of the most famous covers that they've had. And when we went into Afghanistan in 2002, the same photographer went out to see if he could find this girl again. And in fact, they actually found her. She was living at Peshawar. So this is essentially about 17 years later or so, and that is her that's on the right. And you can see that she looks very angry, in fact, on the left, and she even looks a little bit more angry with the photograph on the right. But that was essentially what the catalyst was when I saw that. And the thing that kind of drove me to it was just the entire incredible history that particular region has to it. In fact, the first time that she'd ever been photographed, I found this later, was on the picture, was on the left. The second time she'd ever been photographed her entire life was the picture on the right. And it's remarkable, from the standpoint that is what the life is all about in Afghanistan. For those of you that have been in theater, I'm sure that you know this full well from your own personal experience. But you can see the pain and the tragedy, being a refugee, and the thing that those people in Afghanistan were going through back in the 80s. In fact, their history shows they've been going through this for a lot longer than that. And they bear the scars, and they bear it, it's in their eyes. So I saw that, and at the time I was actually doing some white papers. And one of there was a former faculty member here, which is Tom Zelabar, Admiral Zelabar, and I just had finished writing a white paper for the DoD, and Tom had called me and said, "Hey, who the hell is writing these white papers for you?" And I said, well, Tom, you know exactly what it is. It's me. I'm writing the white papers. And he goes, you knucklehead Benoit, why don't you write your book now that you got some time? And that was kind of the catalyst. So it was sort of this kind of a prod from a guy that I used to fly with that said, hey, why don't you go ahead and write a book? And naturally I was going to write something about what was going on in Afghanistan. The F, right?
Yes. Let me do it.
You pointed at. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So, themes. Well, these are the themes of Falcon on the Tower. And right off the bat, there was a historical theme that I saw there. Obviously, that is rich in history, whether you're talking about Afghanistan or Pakistan. And just going back, if the back button is the B. The first thing that struck me about the eyes with the people, with the Pashtuns, there was, it's very, very remarkable. If you go to Pakistan and you look at that typical look of the Southwest Asian, it's dark-haired, dark eyes. The Pashtun culture, you find a tremendous. Well, there's these isolated regions, whether it be in the tribal areas, in fact, in Pakistan, or some of the Pashtun areas in Nuristan, Waziristan, where you find these incredible eyes. And that was the thing that sort of struck me as I started doing a little bit of research on why do these people have green eyes and some, in fact, blue eyes. And that, it wasn't I was going to start out on doing a book about eyes, but it got me to starting a little bit of research as to what was unique about it. And what I found was that, in fact, because of the incredible history, the Greeks had been through there. And in fact, if you read the book, you'll note that there's a tribal area that's called the Kalash, which is up in this very remote area that's very, very hard to get to up in Pakistan, in the tribal areas. And in fact, not only do they have light eyes and fair hair, they look like they're actually Europeans. They're also pagan, and they believe in the same sorts of gods that the Greeks did. So that was the thing that sort of got me going down the road. That I didn't want to do a book about Greece, didn't want to do a book about Alexander, but there was just this incredible history. The British, obviously, that was the thing which really struck me the most, was the fact that Britain had gotten beat up so badly in that particular region of the world, and fairly recently. I mean, that part of the world has had foreign invaders have not had a great deal of success. We'll put it that way. But the British, most recently, which was beginning at the start of the 19th century, had about 75, almost 80 years or so of incredibly bad success. In fact, where that they had a number of battles, and in fact, which I think if there's any lessons to be learned as from a historical standpoint, is looking at the British, we can certainly learn a lot on what to do, or I should say what not to do, and perhaps there's some things that we can look at that we would think that maybe these are some things that we should do. Which, talking about the British and some of the historical basis on some other lessons learned, it sort of reminds me of the story that occurred back in it was somewhere about the 1955 time frame or so, and at Buckingham Palace there was a dinner one evening, and Winston Churchill was there, and let me see, Clement was the current, that's right, he was the Prime Minister at the time, and Winston Churchill had come into the bathroom, and Clement was, of course, he was a Prime Minister that was famous for essentially nationalizing or setting about a state-owned healthcare system, which is now what the model is for all of Europe, and in fact the model that Canada used, and some of the basis that we began to use. And Winston Churchill had come into the bathroom, and Clement was the only person that was there at the urinal, and So Winston Churchill basically walked all the way down to the very far end. And Clement looked and saw, Winston down the very far end. He said, in this sort of a high-pitched voice, he goes, "So, Winston, feeling a bit standoffish, are we?" And as Winston Churchill was standing there and he was majestically unbuttoning his fly, he said, "Well, no, on the contrary, Clement. Just whenever you see something large, you want to nationalize it." So there is a basis, in fact, that we can learn from the history of that Britain had essentially been through with three separate wars, starting, I believe, in 1835, roughly, and then occupying Kabul, and all the way essentially up until they finally got to the point in the third Afghan Wars that they were going in and they weren't going to stay. So the tremendous amount, historical, so that's one of the themes. Religion, obviously, you can look at, there's obviously there's a conflict within the Islam, religion alone. That's certainly a theme that is discussed in the novel, whether it be, in the Islamic culture and in the Pashtuns. And can I get a show of hands of the folks that have actually been over in Afghanistan? You know that they've got this, there's a saying that, it's myself against my brother and me against the tribe against, everyone else, our religion against the other religion. So whether it be Sunnis that are essentially united against Shia, etc., we do know that there has been, from a historical basis, that religion comes into play heavily within that area. And obviously, I'd already spoken about, the paganism aspect, which I thought was very interesting, and that's up in the tribal areas. Terrorism is obviously the main theme because the book essentially is about, the aspects of terrorism that leads Bryan Craig and his team, which is called Pegasus, and Bryan Craig would talk a little bit more about. Torture is there's a minor theme involved with that we discussed, but I think that's sort of appropriate at this point in time now. When I wrote this book, as you find that the protagonist had ended up in a position that he was and no longer a SEAL because he had been accused of being rough with a particular bad guy that he had captured when he was in country. And as it turns out, that very same occurrence later did happen with several Navy SEALs. So it's not that you need essentially a crystal ball to be able to foretell this, but it does essentially come into play as a minor theme. The flesh trade, I think this is probably one of the themes of the book that is something that I really keyed on because I'd spent some time in Dubai, and again you can tie this back into the historical nature of what Great Britain did, and that's essentially utilizing extremely cheap labor to build their empire. Extremely cheap as in fact they were indentured servants for the most part. In Dubai, if you've been to Dubai, and when the construction was really booming, you noticed a lot of these guys that were dressed in colored outfits that look a lot like this. These are workers that were being essentially hired from Pakistan and from India and paid incredibly, well, we'll put it this way. In some cases, they weren't paid at all. They were, in fact, given the right to be able to go to Dubai and work as a loan against what their future wages would be. And in many cases, they never actually even got paid their wages at all. They'd say, we're going to send you to Dubai, you're going to make all this money, you're going to live like a king, but it's going to cost you $2,000 to get there. Oh, and by the way, your wages for the next 2 years are $2,000. Thanks, and we'll put you there. So there is a sense in that flesh trade that is still an ongoing thing that Dubai, unfortunately, is still dealing with, in fact, today. Where I thought it was really interesting was this, that if you could ever create a factory where you would get people that would be motivated to want to do harm or to motivate someone to come into your way of thinking, you would key on people that are essentially the disenfranchised, as we would say, or the people that you're really screwing over. And in this case, if you've gone to Dubai, you'll see that they're not living. Now, mind you, things have changed a bit since 2006. But if you're going to have madrasha and you have a group of people that have never been paid and they're living and just, 120-degree heat, and the official temperature, by the way, I don't know if you've been there, but the official temperature, you're not allowed to work there when it's above 99.9, and the official temperature for many years was always 99.9, and it never exceeded it. And I know if you've been in Dubai or any of that area, you know that during the summer, every single day, it's about 110 or 120 degrees. Flesh trade also came into, there was another sort of thing that I thought was, sort of unique. And in my travels, we all grew up in the Navy hearing about the jokes about the camel jockey. I never knew that there was actually such a thing until I went to Dubai and I went to my first camel race, and I saw, no kidding, 4- and 5-year-old kids, and this is back in '89, on camels, racing camels at 25 or 30 miles an hour. Not a real safe thing for a 4- and 5-year-old kid to be doing, but again, these were kids that were being grabbed from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, and being sold by their parents to sheikhs and to these people that were conducting this. So that was kind of an interesting theme that I sort of sidetracked into. And then architecture. One thing that's really incredible about Dubai, and that is the construction is still in fact going on, but just the competition, whether it be in Bahrain or Kuwait or in Dubai, is to build the biggest and the tallest and the most outlandish buildings. I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought it made Epcot Center look real in a sense, because there's a place that you could go to and just see this incredible, fantasy. The interesting thing about the architecture, though, there is that Owen Skidmore, which is the primary architectural firm, is a U.S.-based firm. And like a lot of things in the Middle East, they're not really the designers, they're the owners. Everybody else is building it and running it. And so architecture became pretty important. If you read the novel, you'll find that some people get thrown off some real high buildings, from time to time. So I end up creating my own building, which I'll talk about here later. Let me see. The characters. Bryan Craig is a former Navy SEAL. He's a captain. I would have hoped that he'd gone through War College. If I do a follow-on book, I'll make sure that I do put him in the mock, and as a War College grad. His antagonist is, of course, Sultan Khan. And Sultan Khan, is he a true antagonist? I don't know. It's sort of difficult to say, because he comes across as being, well, we know that there's a bad guy somewhere there, but is he really, is he like Saladin? Is he the next Caliph? Is he a real super bad guy? One thing is for certain, that Wazir is a bad guy. Shannon is, I don't know, I guess like Julia and Jamie, kind of one of those types, just the real, the analytical type, the very, very smart one. And then there's Shamema, who is a member of the Kalash tribes. Kevin Davis is a CIA guy, and hopefully they're not seeing any CIA guys in here, but he's a real dweeb. We know what happens with him. It's not very good. Kipling is one of my favorite characters of this book. Is sort of set out in 2 books. There's a very short part 1, which is called The Crusade, and then there's the long part 2, which is The Advent. And in fact, actually, if you really looked at the book, it could be almost two books in one. And I was told, in fact, by my agent, said this should have been 2 books. But then there's a bunch of minor characters. And there's a Captain Robinson, who's the British guy that's out hanging with Kipling. Petrov, who is the Russian, who's a real bad guy. DJ, who's the analyst, it's a Pegasus over in London. we got Dylan Sizemore, who's kind of based off this Australian journalist. He's a journalist. Amir, who's actually Raymond. He's Amir Raymond, who's over in the tribal areas. There's Senator Cox, who is he's a senator that's from Virginia. He's kind of a Lindsey Graham sort of guy, really, because he was a JAG Corps dude, and that ends up becoming he's a junior senator, so he's in his second term. Duncan Maclean. For those of you who read the novel, Duncan Maclean was actually one of my favorite characters, because there's the Duncan Maclean, there's the Maclean, Sergeant Maclean from the Second Afghan War, who is the great-grandfather of the Maclean that is later on in the book going through the mountains and up through Afghanistan and Pakistan with Bryan Craig when they're killing Taliban. He was probably a very difficult guy to read, but he was one of the most fun characters to write because of the vernacular. Then there's Shuja, who was the young boy with the Falcon in the very beginning of the novel. Metropolis, who was his father, and Rabbit. I know that those of you that are here probably wonder who Rabbit Barnes, who Admiral Barnes is actually based on. And I'll tell you right now, he's kind of based on, he's a composite of Chain. He's a composite of Tom Zelibar and of Stavridis. So it's sort of a combination of the two. The Falcon is really the dominant character from a symbolism standpoint. And symbolically, you can ask, well, who is the Falcon? I'm going to actually pose that question to you later on, who you really think that the Falcon is, because the Falcon is an embodiment of a character. And in the culture of the Sheikh, and the Falcon is, it's a prize. It's a symbol of dominance. And so the Falcon, in this particular case, even from the very, very get-go in Chapter 1, you realize that this is a master of everything, of his entire domain. So when you read the book, the thing that you're wondering is the Baz. Who is Baz, which is Islamic for Falcon? Is it Bryan Craig or is it someone else? So that's kind of the question that I posed, and I'm posing to who the reader is. Where am I pointing this? Yeah, but I mean, just to keep going forward, is this? Okay, hold on. Yeah. Where is the target I'm actually pointing at? That way? Okay, so here's the area that we're basically dealing with for the most part, and everybody in this room is obviously very, very familiar with what that is. And besides Afghanistan and Pakistan area and Dubai, which is all right there on that map, the basis of the book starts off with that there's been a series of terrorist attacks. They've occurred in the United States and the UK. And it's up to Bryan Craig, who's the protagonist, to figure out with his group, which is called Pegasus, who are the bad guys. It's a new Islamic faction. It's their are they related to Al-Qaeda? Who are they? And so we start with the prologue, which is a very, very short two paragraphs, and it kind of gets the reader, hopefully, to want to flip over to the next page. But the idea being is here, obviously, we're in country, there's a war. Someone has been caught. This particular individual who was caught, Hanif Sarawali, ends up obviously in Gitmo. And so it's then up to the reader to figure out just exactly who this particular character is. And then hence you end up finding later on that Wazir is him, and Hafez Wali, there's actually 3 of them, which hopefully I'm giving away to everybody, but he's a really bad guy, and it turns out Bryan Craig is the person that's actually caught him. And the fact that he ended up hitting him with the butt end of his assault rifle kind of gets him in a little bit of trouble, and he ends up having to end up standing, for a JAG trial later on in the novel. So that's how we start off. Dealing with the tribal areas and up in that particular region, of course, that it's incredibly mountainous. When you get up to the tribal areas in the Hindu Kush Mountains, it is, talk about the most inhospitable place on the planet. If you get up there now, you're going to find out that there is no such thing up there as far as the climate change affecting the glaciation that's going on up in Pakistan. In fact, if you take all of the glaciers in the entire planet outside of Pakistan, it does not equal the amount of glaciers that are in Pakistan. So it's an incredible country from a standpoint of going from, on the water, dust and sand, to the coldest regions that you can find, with the highest mountainous peaks, in fact, as well. This is an actual, this is a lake, which is Lake Safed Muluk, which is up in the tribal area. It's about 150 miles north of Rawalpindi. So you can just see that there's a little battle that takes place in this particular lake, but those are all, that was cut, with the glacier. Those are, it's a cirque-fed lake, and incredible rainbow trout there as well. By the way, if you ever happen to make it up there to go fishing for rainbow trout, that is.
Are the trout native, or did the Brits bring them in?
No, the trout, I believe, they are actually native. Then there's the star of the book, which is the falcon, I think, and just an incredible bird. I don't know if anyone is here has done any falconry, but they're not very big. They're only about that big, but just it's the fastest bird. It's the fastest animal on the planet, which dive at a speed of up to 220 miles an hour. And of course, from the ruling class to the sheikhs for years, for centuries, in fact, it's a sign of it's a sign of royalty, and only the royals are allowed to have it. And the falconers are going to be members of the royal family, and they're the only ones that are allowed to essentially own the predator. Rudyard Kipling, there is in Bagran, there's a little plaque that's in the BOQ there, and there is a quote which I will read to you. Which Bryan Craig keeps with him at all times, but it reads, when you're wounded and left on Afghanistan's plains, and the women come out to cut at what remains, just roll to your rifle and blow out your brains, and go to your God like a soldier. Go like a soldier, soldier of the Queen. And that's actually there at Bagran, and it was that's why the Kipling ended up coming into the book, because this was a quote that the folks that are up there, and we know that Kipling wrote a great deal about the first and second Afghan wars, and there are the guys that actually that's an actual squad from Afghanistan. I'd probably say that the date of that photograph was somewhere right around between 1880 and 1885. Now, the history of the Brits, obviously they had an occupation in Kabul in the 1830s, and they really did get beat up quite bad. They went into Kabul, they occupied the city in 1835, I believe, and they came in with a force that was not able to really control. They were very, the moral dropped, or I should the morale dropped within the units there. They were not well liked by the locals, and in fact did not work out very well. They when they left the city in 1838, McNaughton, prior to that, who was the ambassador, if you will, he was murdered. His number 2 was also murdered, and a Philistine, who was the general, marched all the troops out, and they were basically completely wiped out. There was one survivor, a sole survivor, that ended up coming back, and it was I believe Dr. Byron, who came back into Jalalabad, and they said, "Where's the rest of the troops?" They said, "Well, they've all been wiped out." So that was kind of the whole basis. If you want to wonder, well, what happened to the Brits back in the 1880s, or I should say the 19th century? You look, you see what the occupation was, and the reason they were there obviously was because of what was known as the Great Game at the time. It's the sort of a counterbalance, or a buffer, if you will, of the conquest of the Russians coming in from the Caucasus. So they looked at Afghanistan as a way to protect what was then, the East India Company, and Afghanistan was the only place that would buffer them between the Russians coming into India. We're there, obviously, not for that same reason, but as a buffer, and a buffer would be, obviously, to buffer for terrorism. There's the doctor that came into Jalalabad, the one sole survivor. Well, the British left, but they didn't stay out. They came back about 35 years later. There were a couple of battles. This happened to be one that they finally won, and this was at Kandahar. That's the 92nd Highlanders, and it was the first time that they really came in and they kicked butt on the Afghans. But what they did differently was they didn't stick around. Their MO at the time was to basically go in, we'll have a battle, and then we're not going to stay here. We're just going to go in, beat up on them, we're going to leave. And that's exactly what they did. So they weren't an occupying force. And that comes into question is there's a discussion between Robinson, who was the captain with the British, and where they're basically discussing, should we stay in Afghanistan or should we leave? And it's always posed back, well, there's no real reason to stay here. And the argument goes back and forth, well, are we occupying, or is this part of extension of the British Empire, or do we leave? So ultimately they decided to leave, and when they left bloodied. But it was a lesson to be learned, is that if you're going to be there, you're going to have to hold hands for a real long time. And that comes into play with Bryan Craig is talking with Dylan Sizemore later on. I really find this slide kind of fascinating, these two, and if I can back it up. This is from 1880, and this is an interesting thing about learning or knowing what the history is in Afghanistan, and then basically looking at the way things are today, because that was in 1880, and the very next thing you can see what the makeup, what these guys look like, these tribal warriors. Now they have Enfield rifles, and the only thing different between them and 1980, this is 1988, is, I don't know, you tell me, I don't see a lot of difference. I say it's pretty much the same. That's 1988.
Maybe warmer clothes.
That's about it, yeah. I just had to put this in. Like I said, I'm a student. I'm a student in history from this particular area. There was a battle that was in Maitland, and the British lost. They had just a few, survivors. At the end, they were actually able to hold off a couple of thousand of these Afghan troops, and the survivors were the 4 gentlemen that were there and that dog Bobby, and they're all getting the cross from the Queen, and that's Queen Victoria that's standing to the left and back, and there's Bobby the dog. But I just found that is the history of Afghanistan. Mecca, obviously. So now we've moved forward to what is the Advent. And that's about 1 million people that are there. Has anybody been to Mecca, by the way, here? To Saudi Arabia? Yeah, okay. So there's been a series of attacks. They occurred in the United States. It happened on a Labor Day. Book, fiction, so it happens at Harrods, it happens at a number of places that are in the States. So Bryan Craig and his team Pegasus, they begin to analyze. They find out, lo and behold, that they've identified one of the bombers that's at Harrods, and the bomber turns out to have been a Gitmo detainee that they figure out using some analysis from DJ over at Pegasus. And so then begins the search for who this new faction is. And the way that they do so is by tracing the trail of money. The trail of money basically takes them to Marbella, where all of the money launderers live, and then from Marbella to Dubai. But on the way, they go to Marbella, they end up actually in Malaga. That is in Malaga, but you can see that the influence of the Muslim culture or the Islamic culture is throughout all of Europe and North Africa, or I should say throughout Spain, throughout all of North Africa, Turkey, and then on over into Asia. And it's very, very typical. The Moors actually had built this. This is over in Malaga. There should be another. So there we've got, that is the Islamic Caliph. This was another basis. Now, if you essentially take that entire map, all of Spain, and go, in fact, up through Turkey and then keep going a little bit to the northeast, that's the Caliph that Al-Qaeda is essentially advocating. The reason that they are seeking to, I should say, put the West down is because they want to reinstate another Caliph, very, very similar to the one that was that you're looking at here, which dates back to the mid-600s or so, so the 7th century. And that's the basis for what the motivation is for the particular terrorist group that Bryan Craig is chasing, or I should say seeking out. And as it turns out, they're of a Sunni background as opposed to Shia. So those are the bad guys that they're actually looking for. They end up well, there's a task force, I should say, where you first meet Bryan Craig when he's a Navy SEAL. They go and they attack the bad guys. He gives the guy the butt end of his M4. Wazir ends up in Gitmo. Later on, he bombs, or they send their factions out to bomb all these targets within the United States, and that's when you really get into the crux of the novel, and then starts the real guts of tracking down these bad guys. This is actually Admiral Zelibar's task force right there. So he would be somewhere on that carrier, I believe. These are a couple of workers. So what the premise is that that they've got this brand new faction has got at their disposal about 100,000 workers there in the Dubai area that are getting paid dirt wages, if they're getting paid at all. Stiff, on many occasions, they're brought to Dubai or to the UAE. Their passports are confiscated, and then they end up at the end of the project without a passport and just essentially living in these camps and going to these madrasas. So they become a real good spot for terrorists to go to recruit, because they can just point back to, well, you just built this building for the West, look what you've done for them, and look what they're doing to you, why don't you come join us? So it becomes a real fertile ground for them to recruit, hence what the basis is for, and by the way, that's exactly what they are doing. They do utilize that. And in back of it, obviously, that's the Burj Dubai. That's not Petrov, but that is kind of what Petrov, if you could imagine Petrov. So that's Rasputin. But Petrov, as you well know, is the Russian who is utilized by Wazir and his Your Shahid, which is this fictional terrorist group, to recruit and to set up a company that was called Dubai Pact to be able to bring in these workers from Pakistan. So they set up this whole scheme to be able to seduce these very, very poor farmers living in Pakistan, to get them to go to Dubai, and knowing full well that ultimately they're going to try to convert them through these madrasas that are over in Dubai and over in Pakistan into sleeper cells, if you will, but certainly groups that they can later tap. And Petrov, who dies, a death that's not unsimilar to the way that Rasputin died, by the way, too. So it was not pretty, to say the least. When I wrote the novel, the Burj Dubai was about, just to give you sort of a scale, this is about where the Empire State Building is, about right there. So that you're looking at about 1,800 feet. It ended up topping out at about 2,300 feet. The building was continually being redesigned, and again, Owen Skidmore, who built the Sears Tower, is the primary architects for that building. That building here in the United States would probably have cost about $18 to $20 billion to construct. In Dubai, it costs a little bit over $2.5 billion. The reason being is it's essentially what the labor costs are. In Dubai, when they were building that building, they essentially were working 24/7. The construction never stopped. And the workers were working six days a week, and they're working 12-hour days. And, you know, as I said, that they weren't allowed to work when the official temperature in Dubai exceeded 100 degrees. The official temperature in Dubai while that building was going up never exceeded 100 degrees. It would always be 99.9. And in fact, I would be there while the building was being built, and my thermostat was reading 110, 115 degrees, and these folks were still out there working. Because the building was still going up, I had to kind of redesign, or I had to design my own building. So I designed this tower. I got with an architect because I had to build something that was going to be somewhat believable, was going to pass the muster test for the experts out there that are actual architects. And I created this building, which is called the Burj Al Baz, or Falcon On The Tower. And it was designed, it was modeled pretty much after what the Burj Dubai ended up being. But at the time when I was writing it, the Burj Dubai was, it wasn't even a quarter of the way up, and they were redesigning how high it was going to be. The building I ended up building was, or I designed in the novel, was 3,000 feet, and this ended up being 2,300, I think, is what it topped out at. But it's still, it's the tallest building in the world by far. In my building, it takes Petrov, I think, 20 seconds to fall from the top floor, or something like that. So it's a long way to go and a lot of stuff to think about. The, Pegasus is based out of London, and we don't have any British folks here, but Pegasus is a collaboration between the UK and the United States. Bryan Craig heads up his team, and they're using financial forensics plus a lot of other tools that are at his disposal, like being able to call in some special ops team when the need comes. And it's all driven based upon, obviously, from the commander-in-chief. So it comes from top down. It's not Bryan Craig out there as a rogue doing all on his own, but it's definitely, it's a collaboration between the UK and the United States. So it is a joint, it's a joint deal. A great deal of the book takes place in Dubai. Hands for folks that have been to Dubai. What did you think? Yeah? Did you go skiing there in the mall?
I've been to it, I didn't actually go.
Okay. Yeah, it is. And that is the symbol of, that's the Burj Al Arab. And it's a very, very symbolic place. We're very fortunate to have our friends. By the same token, however, it is, from a financial standpoint, it's one of the key areas where there's a great deal of money laundering that goes on through Dubai, because the sense that it just, there's not a lot of scrutiny. They kind of close their eyes and let, yeah, and they kind of let it occur. So there's some pluses and minuses. On the plus side, it's got probably one of the strictest security areas coming in and going out from a standpoint of passports, which makes you even, I don't know if you want to applaud Mossad, but to be able to go in, and what Mossad just recently did in Dubai is pretty amazing. On the creepy side, from the standpoint of the majority of any bad money that's going on throughout the planet that's filtering over to the terrorists goes through Dubai, and that is occurring today. So that is a nonstop problem that is there. So that's why that the team of Pegasus ends up in Dubai, is because that's where the money is. They've followed the flow of money. They end up with a bank, a fake bank that's there, which is the Bank of Dubai, and it's headed up by a British guy who's got his number of why that he's working for the bad guys. Just sort of more or less turning or closing, keeping a blind eye to where the source of the money is, as long as he's actually making money. And unfortunately, that's exactly the way it works there. Do they really care a great deal about if the West is down because of Islam? Absolutely not. In fact, the UAE always has sort of a fearful eye looking, across the Persian Gulf towards Iran, thinking, the emirs there, the imams they're kind of fearful, so they're always worried. That's why that they really keep us close by there. But by the same token, it's a bit of a strain, type of relationship, because we do know that so much money flows through their banks into the hands of the terrorists, and that's just unfortunately the way it works. One of the things I drew upon was there was a movie that was done. It was a silent film movie, which is called Metropolis, that was done back in the late 1920s by Fritz Lang. And I thought there was an interesting parallel, because with the workers that were being abused, much like the troglodytes that were in this movie, there are the people that are building the city, and then there's elitists that live up at the very top in the clouds. Much was the case over in Dubai. The same thing, where you had the Pakistanis and these very, very poor servants and workers in their blue outfits that were building the city, never being held the carrot that they would one day be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But we all knew that it was not the case, and then at the end of the project, they'd find out that that's not the case as well. Well, there were a lot of similarities I saw between this movie that was done back in the late 1920s and what actually occurs over in Dubai. Not only did you have this fembot robot that was there that ends up kind of being sort of saving the day, if you will, for the workers, but you've got this incredible city that Dubai really looks like it was almost based upon. These massive tall buildings and this luxury of living in the clouds, much like that was going on there. And now, because of the heat, if you will, of the world coming down on the camel jockeys that were 4 and 5 years old, they also have their own share of robots. So that was back in, you can see there's Dubai. This is probably from the late 1980s, I'm sorry, the late 1990s. You can see the city of Dubai, the skyline is now beginning to change. And that is there's your basic camel jockey that was a child that was a Pakistani child that had been sold into essentially slave labor to owners of camels over in Dubai. And that's a race right there. And the problem being, this gets into the flesh trade theme of the book, was that that this was, I mean, this had been going on for years and years and years, and it was finally brought to the world's attention when 60 Minutes did an episode, or I should say, I think Mike Wallace was one that did it, back in about 2003 or 2004, which really kind of put the world's focus on, like, we can't believe that there's 3- and 4-year-old kids on these camels that are riding 35 miles an hour. And you know what would happen if that kid fell off that camel going 35 miles an hour? It would not be pretty. And in fact, that occurs a lot. We know that just regular jockeys on a horse that's only half that high, that's one of the most dangerous occupations in the world, let alone throwing a 3- and 4-year-old kid. Well, the heat came down on them, and sure enough, just like in Metropolis, they went with $10,000 robots, and these robots are absolutely amazing. The next time you guys if you ever get over to Dubai again, if you go during, let me see, the camel race season starts right around November and lasts through the end of this month. And it's completely an amazing thing to watch and witness, because you've got a bunch of guys that are in Escalades that go around this. There's a 10,000 meter track, and you've got about 10 of these $2 million camels that are owned by all these sheikhs. Sheikh Mo owns, I think, about 20 or 30 of these camels. And they've got on top of them $10,000 to $20,000 robots that look like human beings. They speak like human beings, and they've actually put voices in them that are like the little kids that used to ride them, so they sound like little kids. And on the Escalades, these SUVs chase the camels around the entire circumference of the track with their little joysticks and their remote controls to cause the camel or the jockey to whip the camel. And so that's kind of how it's evolved on the official races, if you will. That's not to say that off on the side tracks, for those that can't afford these, these robots, that they still don't have the kids. In fact, they do. And there's been a number of occasions where some groups have gone in, rescued kids, brought them back to Pakistan, only to later on the parents then resell them back to these groups back over in the UAE. The UAE has been really guilty about this. In fact, Saudi Arabia is pretty guilty. Bahrain does it as well. So it's still an ongoing problem until everybody finally turns to the jockey thing. I mean, to the robot thing. And if you're looking for like a real young, suicide bomber, would probably be a retired camel jockey who is all of 7 or 8 years old, who's now, just to kind of detract, if you will, it's not like there's thousands of these little kids, but they can number in the hundreds. And literally, when they reach the age of 6 or 7, they are pretty much, their career is over. They're not going to be going back to Pakistan because they've got no way to get there. They're unofficial guests of the UAE or unofficial guests of Saudi Arabia. So they become immediately going from where they are to the madrasas of these fanatical groups. This is an actual idol that is, I'm going to back up one. That's the tribal area of Pakistan, and that is today. So that's where they live. Now, this particular area is so incredibly remote that when there was an earthquake there in 2007 that really decimated the entire area. I mean, it made Haiti look It was much, much worse than 80. It had displaced something like 1.3 million people. No one ever really got a true body count as to how many people had perished during this particular earthquake, but that is there are more earthquakes in that area than there are anywhere in the entire planet. And the reason being is because you've got essentially the Asian the tectonic plate, and then the continental plate of the Indian plate shoving into each other. So you've got one that so overlaps the other, causing the orogeny, if you will, the Himalayan mountains to move up, and then hence the reason that you've got all these these earthquakes. So you can see that these particular structures they probably don't do too well in earthquake that's like a 6 or on up. So you can imagine one that was an 8. There was one in 2007, as I said, that was right around an 8, and they still have no idea how many people had actually perished because it was so difficult that to get up there that not even that the Pakistani military could essentially effectively get up into the tribal area. And that's why it's such a great place for Al-Qaeda and for Taliban to operate from, because you can't get there and they can operate safely. So that is a Kalash village. This is a Kalash idol. This is very similar to a pagan idol that the Greeks used. The Greek influence goes there, like I said, goes back to 300 years when Alexander came through. Now even Alexander actually didn't bring his troops up into the Kalash area, up to the tribal areas. Instead, he sent scouts. And it's obvious that when you see what the villagers look like there now. Oh, that's Shemema. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, this is a typical Kalash woman. I'm kidding. That's not a typical Kalash woman. These are Kalash villagers right there. That's a typical villager that you'll see, and you can look at those two kids and say, well, yeah, they do not look like what I would call Pakistanis at all. In fact, it is very... You can go to Greece and you'll see in the northern parts of Greece, it looks very, very similar. And so it is believed that they're the direct descendants of, not necessarily Alexander, but generals that were within the Greek army when Alexander had come, moving through back 2,300 years ago. Yeah, there we go. Just two more shots. And like I said, if I were to tell you that these are a couple of Pakistanis, you would look, well, that doesn't look anything like Pakistan. If I said to you, oh, that's a Greek kid, and there's another Greek kid, you go, yeah, that looks exactly. But the Northern European influence is obvious. So again, Pakistan is a very unique element. Now, unfortunately, these tribes, they're persecuted quite a bit. They're bullied by the Taliban. They're bullied by a lot of the Islamic, tribal areas because they are so incredibly different. They've got an interesting way of life too. They like to drink. They like to have fun and party. Well, they do really well here, I think, at the War College. This is a sit down. So Bryan Craig comes with his team, and he meets with a group. He ends up actually, finding out that there has been a, the plan is being to bring these tribal people over to Dubai, basically get into a situation where they're going to create this brand new element of suicide bombers to be able to use as their little army. If you add up the numbers, they quickly realize, wow, the potential is just gigantic. When you're looking at 100,000 workers just within Dubai alone, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these potential workers that are all throughout this area that is incredibly impoverished. So they're baiting them, and it's very, very easy. So Bryan Craig ends up with his team. They end up kind of tracing it down to these tribal areas to figure out, oh, so the source is coming from here. Then hence they end up with a fight with the Taliban. After the Taliban fight, which is kind of a success, then they send in their Predator drone. When I wrote the novel back in 2006, the Predator was just really beginning to get utilized in the air-to-ground mode. And one of the criticisms, I should say, that I hear lately is that, or I should say criticisms of the Bush administration, was that the current administration has used the Predator tenfold more often than what the Bush administration had used as far as attacking the ground elements, I should say the Taliban that are on the ground. Well, the fact of the matter is, you all are aware that it was in the ramp-up phase. So you actually had to get from the recon phase of utilization of the Predator, which it had been designed to do, to the point where you're actually putting stuff that you can, go air to mud with. So basically back in 2005, 2006 is when the ramp-up began, that they really began to utilize effectively the Predator to being able to drop it on the elements and hopefully kill them and not a bunch of other civilian casualties. That's what it's supposed to look like. So, and then going with the novel, Bryan Craig realizes, I got to get back to Dubai. The bad guy is actually there. And his protagonist, if you will, which is the Sultan. And it turns out the Sultan, who is a vastly wealthy individual, you begin to realize that, well, is he really leading it, or is he sort of just the guy that has everybody doing it, and he can claim, well, I really don't know anything what's going on. They just want me to be the very next caliph. You begin to realize that what the plan is for him to become the caliph. And the caliph would be to lead all of the Islamic cultures in all of the Islamic areas, whether it be the Sunni or Shia, and one mass front, if you will, of the Saladin of the modern era. And it would be the place that if you were going to be the leader of the entire Islamic world now, I would want to be the leader of the country that's of Islam that has nuclear weapons. So the obvious place would be, well, Pakistan. And you can see that although he's based out of Dubai, why is he based out of Dubai? Well, that's where the money is. Where does he want to be? Pakistan. So that's hence what the real premise is at, at the end, and where the kind of the fear goes is, at the very end of the novel, you're kind of going, and there's our main guy. At the very end of the novel, and like Saladin, this is a person that is well respected. He can operate both within the West. He can operate with all of his people. He feels comfortable being with the West. The West feels comfortable with him. They're fearful of him. And it's one of the, I would say the scariest aspects would be if there were to become another Saladin. Because the Saladin that would unify all of the Islamic world and then have nuclear weapons at their disposal. And obviously, again, the place that you would be most concerned about, and the reason that we're in that area, is because of Pakistan. And in the novel, what ends up happening is that it doesn't really come right out and say that Khan has taken over Pakistan, but you get the feeling at the very end that once it all is said and done with it, that's where he's going. The people in Pakistan love him, because what he ends up doing is he becomes the spiritual leader and the moral leader of all of the workers and all of the people that are over in Pakistan. So the workers that are in Dubai and of the people that are over in Pakistan as well. And obviously, if you're going to create insurrection, you're going to take over, it's Pakistan that you want to own. Were they at the nuclear summit, by the way? I don't even know, at Pakistan. When I wrote the novel, there was, Tim was still alive at the time, and there's kind of a funny scene where, Senator Cox goes on Meet the Press, and I think it was one of the funniest things that I wrote. I heard Tim had actually read it a little bit, or got a brief from a friend of mine, and thought it was really, really quite funny. But he ended up passing away, actually, not too long after the book had been written. One of the other themes, too, that is in there that is discussed is about torture. That's probably not too far from what the reality is of doing some waterboarding. I know when I went through AOCS, I'm not AOCS, but I went through survival. That's kind of how my survival went. This is what the media would want you to think is actually occurring. And that's probably not too far away from the way it is sometimes now. But so reality is somewhere probably in the middle. That's the Claridge's in London. If you ever get to London, that's where you got to stay. I'm going to tell you, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. The embassy that's over Grosvenor Park is right there. The book ends kind of in a cliffhanger, and what ends up occurring is that the bad guys get a hold of some enriched uranium, and they put together a bomb that is of the gun type that was used that was dropped actually over Hiroshima. And essentially it just fires a uranium bullet that impacts a sphere of uranium and then causes a chain reaction. In the novel, it happens right in the middle of a celebration of fireworks, celebration that's in New York City. So would terrorists want to strike at something like that? Obviously that they would. And it's not out of the realm of possibilities. They certainly could. Mind you, we built that particular bomb, and that is Little Boy right there. We built that bomb over 60 years ago. So that was that's 60-year-old technology right there. And you don't have to have something all that big. And in the novel, they discuss, well, do they have the capability? And he goes, well, he tells, Bryan Craig says to Rabbit, yes, he does. Certainly if he takes over Pakistan, the capability is already lying there with an arsenal. So that's where you end up leaving it with, that doesn't happen, but you're wondering, oh, is that going to happen? And it ends in a cliffhanger, well, we don't know. So maybe the next novel has yet to be written. There's the buildings. I'm going to kind of throw it up for any questions right now, because that's pretty much it.
And the movie rights on.
There were some rights that were bought, and I doubt if it'll ever be made, because to make it would be quite an expensive book. So I mean, it'd be quite an expensive movie.
We'll give the students a quick opportunity because they have elected in about 5 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander John Floyd. Really appreciate it, and found this really interesting. I'm really curious about the art of fiction writing, and I was just curious. I think you mentioned that the photograph of the young Afghan girl was, like, I think you call her a catalyst.
Right.
And I was just curious, had you been thinking about writing books before that?
Yeah. Well, I had two short stories that were published back in the late 1980s, and the first novel that I had thought about writing, I was about 22 years old, and I was one of the JOs when I was in the Navy that was always getting tapped to write the Admiral speech or write the CO speech. So I didn't major in journalism, but anyway, make a long story short, or as the Brits would say, make a long story longer. I was going to write a novel when I was 22, and I got about 3 pages into this notebook, and I said, I don't have a life experience. I think from a confidence standpoint, it took those years of meeting folks like, the Navy, I should say, gave me the life experience to be able to put together characters that I think would make for a really interesting story. And so you're going to find, there's a lot of anecdotal, elements that are in the novel that had I not had the life experience, they wouldn't be there. I could list you them. So from the creative end was the life experience that gave me the confidence to be able to sit down and create something that was completely, fiction. The book I'm working on right now, I've got the confidence. I've written the first one. And by the way, I didn't write this with an outline. I kind of started just writing it. I don't advise doing that at all. In fact, the best way to go about it is to create a novel, is to write an outline and just expect that it's all going to change while you're writing it. but start out with an outline. I started out just writing, and then it just began. Then I realized, uh-oh, I've got myself into trouble here. I better do an outline. But I had already written probably about 150 pages when I got to that point. But I didn't know where I was going to go with it. But definitely sit down, with an outline. Kind of one of the rules I would say is there is zero television. For myself, I had to be completely isolated. I also found that, as just so happened, I was kind of in a wind-up of a company that I was involved in that had been sold. So I literally had a bunch of free time where the only thing I was doing really was some white papers for, for the Pentagon, for the DOT, some stuff that I was doing there. So I really had a lot of free time. And that gave me the ability to be able to sit down and start kind of the end of June, and I wrapped up at the end of November. So about 150,000 words in 4.5 months, which is a pretty good clip. So use an outline, and don't be fearful about it too. You kind of have to sit down and kind of let your imagination go, because that whole thing about the truth is stranger than fiction really is. Because when I wrote this back in 2006, I thought there was some real fantasy involved with it, and it turns out that there were elements of the book that really ended up becoming true. My terrorists were very sophisticated, terrorists. They were not generally the ones that are being, coming off the streets, so to speak. And then, as it turned out, I had some Pakistanis. One was a doctor, and after I wrote the book in Britain, in London, some Pakistani doctors tried to. They ended up detonating themselves, setting themselves on fire. So my terrorists are actually a little bit more capable. Fortunately, that was a fictional part. But then we can just see with the latest bombing, or the latest attempt, I should say, the kid that went over to, Detroit, again, that kind of falls in the realm that, oh wow, a very sophisticated, wealthy, the kid was educated, et cetera. So what I thought was complete, fiction at first, ended up actually becoming real. I just hope that the end, with the element where they're going into, a fireworks display, and putting a nuke or a dirty bomb into a fireworks display in the middle of, New York City Harbor does not occur. That would not be good. So hopefully I got your question answered on that from the.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
I'll wait, let that guy answer. Oh.
How's it going, sir? Jose Gomez, Go-Gators, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Did you associate yourself with any character? Did you think of yourself as any of those characters?
No, I definitely did not think of myself as Bryan Craig. No, there was not one character in there that I really. Well, I would say, besides the fact that I made him older, he was like a 45-year-old guy or something like that. But no, there's really no one in the book that was a real live person that I thought of, with the exception of Rabbit, who I said was a composite of Admiral Stavridis and Admiral Zelibar. That was the only one. All the rest were just completely fictional characters that just came out of my noggin. Oh, except for Dylan Sizemore, there's a journalist, and I can't remember the guy's name. He actually is Australian, and he was sort of the basis of CNN guy. You've probably seen him. He's got sort of a crooked nose, and I think he works for CNN now. They kind of tend to move around a little bit, but he had ended up. I read this interesting story, and he's on television as well. He ended up actually with an element of the Al-Qaeda by agreeing to get into a vehicle, like just trying to imagine doing this, saying, yeah, I'll go meet your leader, but we're going to blindfold you and throw you in a car and drive you around for a couple days before we do that. And I'm thinking, well, that is just, that takes a lot of nerve or, stupidity, because, but anyway, that's the only other guy that's in the novel that sort of resembles, one of the real life people out there.
Hopefully we'll see you guys tonight at 1700 at the Oak Club.
Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks.